Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Before we roll out, there's something you need to hear. After tonight, you might think twice before parking your rig on a dark shoulder or pulling into a rest stop that feels a little too still. Tonight, we're diving into 6 true trucker horror stories from Oregon's forgotten highways, routes so empty most maps don't even bother naming them. These aren't campfire tales. These happen to real drivers. Like the hauler who crept into a mountain town and found every person frozen mid-motion, or the driver who took a detour around black ice and ended up at a dead way station where something in the dark copied his voice exactly. Highway Patrol buried every detail. If you're new, hit subscribe. Now kill your engine, lock your cab, and settle in, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see an empty road forever. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've spent the last several years driving long-haul routes across Oregon in a battered Kenworth that's older than I am. People think truckers choose the road because they love freedom. Maybe that's true for some, but not for me. I chose it because it let me outrun the things I couldn't face at home. Bills I couldn't pay, grief I couldn't shake, and a silence in my house that was too big for just me and my daughter Emma. And yes, before you ask, I'm from Antelope. Bad Antelope. The town that made national news decades ago when a cult tried to poison an entire county. Most people think that story ended with arrests, deportations, and a messy line in history books. They're wrong. I grew up under those shadows, left for college, then crawled back with an infant and no money. Emma's father, Marcus, had vanished years earlier while running a delivery route truck idling, headlights on, cargo untouched, his logbook still open on the passenger seat. The police called it abandonment. I've seen a lot in my years on the road, and even I knew that was a lie. Marcus wouldn't have left his daughter. Something took him. Driving long haul for nearly 3 years taught me every bend of the back highways, every mountain pass that turned deadly the moment fog rolled in, every lonely fuel stop where the lights flickered more than they should. I've delivered loads to meth labs pretending to be ranches, to cabins where customers greeted me covered in blood and claimed they'd been cleaning animals, to rest areas where something in the tree line tracked the beam of my flashlight. But nothing prepared me for what happened on February 12th. I had just finished unloading pallets in the Dallas when dispatch pinged me with an unexpected night haul. The message made my stomach drop. A special request delivery headed to 11 Meadowbrook Lane. The name attached to the manifest was identical to the one from Marcus's final route, David Chen. Even the freight description mirrored his last job, a single sealed crate, weight negligible, contents, food product. I called dispatch immediately and told them the address didn't exist anymore. They brushed it off. Probably a resale of the old land. Happens all the time, my supervisor said. Just drop the load and confirm delivery. It's already paid for. But something in my gut twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted me on that road. I hooked the small crate into my trailer, secured it, and started the engine. Oregon nights have a way of swallowing your headlights whole. The deeper you drive, the more you feel like you're moving through liquid darkness instead of air. As I pulled onto the highway, I noticed the GPS route had updated itself, the same route copied from Marcus's case file. I passed the rusted fences of the old Rajneesh compound, the place everyone pretends is harmless history now, though no one goes near it after sunset. I drove past the neglected cemetery where some of the poisoning victims lay buried under crooked stones. A little farther, tourists snapped pictures of a historical marker without realizing the whole story had never been told. A few miles into the haul, my radio began to fail. Not the usual static. These were old songs from the 1980s playing at half speed, warped and drowning like they were broadcasting from underwater. Between them came fragments of emergency news reports I'd heard in documentaries, bioterror attack in Wasco County, hundreds sickened, pathogen unknown. Then more static. Even my USB drive played audio slowed to a crawl. My truck felt suddenly smaller, like the darkness outside was pressing in, listening. The GPS map shifted again, rearranging itself into a version of Antelope I'd never seen. Roads that existed for decades vanished. Roads I knew had never existed appeared cleanly labeled like they belonged. My ETA jumped forward and backward in time with every mile. I remembered the photos of Marcus's abandoned truck found on a dirt track leading toward a house that had burned decades earlier. No electricity, no residents, no new construction. Yet here I was following a route toward that same place, as if time itself were folding. I lost phone signal as I approached the foothills. The GPS told me to turn left onto a road that didn't exist on any modern map. When my headlights hit it, the dirt path was lined with weathered wooden signs marked with house numbers, 7, 9, 13 addresses that disappeared whenever I looked directly at them, only to return in my peripheral vision as faint outlines of porches, windows, and silhouettes of people watching me pass. At the end of that impossible road stood 11 Meadowbrook Lane, not ruins, not a burned foundation. A fully restored 2-story yellow house with lights glowing through every window and smoke rising from the chimney. A blue pickup sat in the driveway, the exact make, model, and year described in Marcus's missing report. My breath caught. Either someone rebuilt this place overnight, or I had driven into something that wasn't the present. I parked behind the truck and reached for my phone out of habit. The screen flickered and displayed the date, February 12, 1984. The time, 8:17 p.m. My phone rang, even though I had no signal. The ringtone sounded like it came from a rotary phone buried underground. I answered without thinking. Sarah, Marcus's voice. But it was hollow, like it had traveled through too many years, too many walls, too many dying radios. You came back, he said. I nearly dropped the phone. Where are you? Emma still asks. Don't get out of the truck, he whispered. They're watching from the windows. I looked up. Every glowing window now held a silhouette. Men, women, even children, all standing absolutely still, all facing my truck. Marcus, what is this place? It's February 12th, 1984, he said. The day everything ended. The day the Rajneeshis poisoned the restaurants in the Dallas. But here, the day never ended. The loop trapped everyone who was here that night. Time collapsed and reset. We'd been stuck for decades. The front door opened. An elderly woman stepped out wearing a red robe, her eyes cold and sharp. I recognized her instantly, Ma Anand Sheila. Younger, alive, exactly the way she looked in archival footage. She should have been gone for decades. The bioweapon wasn't just salmonella, Marcus whispered. It altered time for those closest to the epicenter. It made them immortal inside this loop. They pull new people in whenever they can. Drivers, hikers, anyone who wanders too close. I've been here since the night I disappeared. Figures began stepping out of the house faces I'd seen on posters, in missing persons bulletins, in unsolved case files. All of them preserved in the age they vanished. Why am I not trapped? I asked. You haven't consumed anything from them, he said. Food, water, even the air inside long enough becomes part of the loop. You're still tied to the real world. Sheila walked right up to my window and pressed a paper note against the glass. Come inside, Sarah. Emma is waiting for you. I froze. How do they know about Emma? I told them, Marcus said, his voice cracking. After years of torture, I told them everything. They orchestrated this. They've been waiting. The silhouettes stepped closer. Their eyes reflected light like animals deep in the woods. There's one way to end the loop, Marcus said. Destroy the source in the basement. But you'd have to go inside. Sheila lifted another note. Your daughter dies tonight if you don't come. Our people are everywhere. At the bottom of the note was my babysitter's address. I slammed my truck into reverse. The cultists scattered, losing their perfect synchronization. Some screamed like air escaping collapsing lungs. The house flickered behind me, glowing brighter, pulsing like a living organism watching me flee. I wasn't running. I was buying time. I drove straight toward the Antelope Community Center, the cult's old gathering place. If there was any device powerful enough to distort time, it would be somewhere connected to their past. But when I arrived, every light was blazing, and the parking lot was full of cars from each missing decade, their metal frames gleaming like they had just been washed. I tried calling 911. Only static replied. Tried the FBI. Static. I dialed my babysitter, praying. She answered immediately. Emma's fine, she's right here. Then I heard my daughter's tiny voice, frightened. Mommy, strangers keep asking where your truck keys are. The line died. I ran for the building. The doors opened on their own. Welcome home, Sarah, Sheila said, smiling. Inside, the hall looked exactly like it had in archive footage. Long tables, paper plates, small cups filled with red liquid. The air smelled of incense, disinfectant, and something terribly wrong beneath it. Dozens of people sat waiting, every one of them missing for years. "The Last Supper," Sheila murmured. "Drink with us and your daughter goes free. Refuse, and she joins us anyway." "Where's the device?" I demanded. She blinked slowly. "There is no device." My blood turned to ice. "The loop exists because we have willed it into existence," she said. "The bioweapon unlocked our minds. We created paradise. No aging, no death." It hit me then. They weren't preserving paradise. They were preserving the night everything fell apart. A refusal to accept their defeat. "You were supposed to lose that day," I said quietly. "History already buried you." Her face twisted with rage and terror. She handed me a cup. I raised it, pretending to drink. Most of the liquid dripped down my shirt. The few drops that touched my tongue tasted metallic, oily, wrong. Sheila relaxed. Everyone lifted their cups. I hurled mine at the nearest window. The glass shattered, and with it, the illusion shattered. The bright hall dissolved into a charred ruin. Corpses slumped over collapsed tables. The people who had seemed alive were long dead. The loop had preserved a snapshot of mass death and forced consciousness into it. The building trembled violently. Outside, engines revved cars that hadn't started in 40 years roared to life. Their drivers were finally free. But Sheila wasn't. She lunged at me, skin sliding off bone, teeth bared, a corpse moving on memory alone. "If we can't have paradise," she shrieked, "then everyone burns." I dove through the broken window, hit the ground hard, and ran. Behind me, the building collapsed in a roar of flame and dust. Her scream faded under the rubble. When I reached my truck, my phone displayed the correct time and date, February 12, 2024. Messages from Jennifer flooded my screen. She was terrified, demanding to know where I was. Emma was safe. Nothing unusual had happened. The threat had been nothing but a weapon to pull me deeper. The next morning, investigators found dozens of skeletal remains in the collapsed community center, including Marcus's. They said it was a gas explosion. No one questioned the oddities. I quit long-haul trucking and took a job at the Antelope Historical Society. Some stories save lives. Some keep people from wandering down roads that shouldn't exist. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I still smell incense drifting over the hills. Still hear warped radios playing songs from another decade. The loop is broken, but echoes don't fade easily. I keep Marcus's photo pinned above my desk, not out of grief, but out of respect. For decades, he was a prisoner of a nightmare and still found a way to save Emma and me. Emma's 8 now. My name is Amy Chen, and I've been driving long-haul freight for only a few months, but that's long enough to learn something most people never understand. The highway will chew you up if you're not fast, focused, and fearless. I got my CDL right after graduating high school, hoping to save money for college, and I landed a job with Coastal Ridge Transport, a small outfit based near Bandon, Oregon. I loved the road more than I expected. The rumble of the engine beneath me, the quiet of dawn on an empty highway, the way the sun rose in my mirrors as I crossed long stretches of coastal road. My regular route took me through Bandon every week, a tourist town 2 blocks from the beach, always buzzing in summer. It seemed like the perfect job. Good pay, friendly dispatchers, and a boss who actually cared. I was young, optimistic, and completely unprepared for what I was about to uncover. Most of my runs were simple. Pick up a refrigerated trailer from the depot, drive the coast for 5 hours, drop it in Crescent City, reload, then head back north. The Bandon stop was the calmest part of my day. A tiny company yard tucked behind a row of beachside warehouses, no bigger than a gas station lot. A small shack held the logbooks, the break room, and the equipment lockers. Out behind it sat a narrow strip of employee parking, a dumpster, and beyond that, sand dunes that rolled straight down to the ocean. My routine never changed. Arrive before dawn, hoof my trailer, complete my pre-trip inspection, and hit the road. Most mornings were peaceful. Sometimes fog smothered the coast so thick I could barely see 5 feet ahead, but I grew to love the quiet of those hours. I felt like my life was finally heading somewhere stable. Until July 4th. Anyone who drives the Oregon coast knows July 4th is chaos. The biggest beach festival of the year fills every campground, every motel, every inch of highway with families trying to get fireworks, seafood, and vacation photos. Dispatch warned us the lot would be crowded and the schedule tight. I left home early, pulling into the Bandon Yard at 3:30 a.m., hoping to beat the tourist traffic and proud that my boss, Mike, trusted me to prep my own rig before he arrived with paperwork. I stepped out into thick fog, so heavy the world felt muted, and walked toward the shack, keys in hand. But halfway there, something made my breath freeze in my chest. The metal door to the equipment shack was shredded. 4 enormous gashes ran straight down the steel from top to bottom, deep gouges where metal had curled outward like torn skin. Each claw mark was nearly 2 inches wide, perfectly spaced, clean, precise. Deep enough that I could slip my fingers inside the grooves. But the door wasn't the part that made my knees shake. A thick black trail, sticky and wet, stretched from the dumpster all the way toward the dunes. It wasn't tar. It wasn't oil. It looked disturbingly organic, like blood that nature hadn't intended. And the smell coming from it was sweet and rotten, like flowers decaying in stagnant water. I should have called someone. Instead, half asleep and terrified of overreacting, I convinced myself it was a prank, maybe vandals. Maybe some messed up festival stunt. Anything human. I managed to pry the damaged door open and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. The logbooks were in place, the radios lined up, the coffee maker humming quietly. I tried to bury the unease clawing at my stomach and went through my routine, refusing to look at the ruined door again. I hooked up my trailer, checked my lines, and was halfway through my inspection when the first regular of the morning rolled in, old Jack Patterson, a retired trucker who still liked hanging around the yard before sunrise. He leaned against my rig and told me about a local dog named Rusty that had vanished 3 nights earlier. Gone without a trace from a fenced yard. But that wasn't the part that made my hands begin to shake. Jack said the fence had strange gashes, huge claw marks, and a sickly sweet smell in the air. The same smell I breathed in earlier. I tried to ignore the dread building inside and finish my inspection. After Jack left and the yard grew quiet again, curiosity pulled me back toward the shack. Something didn't feel right. Mike kept a security system for the yard, basic cameras, nothing fancy, but enough to cover the parking area, the shack, and the dumpster. I went inside, pulled up the footage from the night before, and hit play. At first, everything looked normal. Empty yard, fog drifting past. A few distant headlights glinting across the road. Then, at about 2:17 a.m., something slid into view near the dumpster. At first, I thought it was a person crouching. But as it rose, stretching far taller than any human should, my stomach flipped. Its limbs bent at angles that made no sense, like its body didn't understand how bones were supposed to work. It moved in a scuttling, spider-like way, smooth, fast, unsettling. Even in the grainy darkness, the camera caught the shape of its enormous frame. 8 or 9 feet tall. Limbs that looked like arms and legs but weren't quite either. And when it turned, tiny reflections glimmered across multiple eyes. Too many eyes. But its appearance wasn't the worst part. It wasn't rummaging through trash like an animal. It was sorting it. Carefully, methodically. It laid items out in tidy piles, plastic wrappers, broken straps, even parts of discarded manifests, examining each one like it was collecting information, studying patterns, learning. After nearly an hour, it approached the shack door. I watched it trace the frame with long fingers, examine the handle, feel the metal as if testing it. Then 4 claws extended, huge black talons, and carved through the door like it was paper. When it finished, it gathered a few sorted items and retreated toward the dunes, leaving that black trail behind. By the time Mike arrived just before noon, I'd watched the footage at least 20 times. When I showed him, all color drained from his face. He wanted to call the police immediately, and Officer Davis came fast, watched the video, and shook his head. Could be someone in a costume, he said. Festival pranks get weird. He filed a damage report and left, unconvinced. Mike tried to reassure me, but his voice trembled. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw claws slashing metal. Around 2 a.m., I gave in and drove by the yard just to ease my mind. When I arrived, My heart nearly stopped. The brand new shack door installed only hours earlier was ruined again. But this time, the gashes weren't random. They spelled my name. Amy, carved deep into the metal. Deliberate. Precise. My name tag flashed through my mind. The creature had seen me. Learned my name, chosen me. I barely slept. The next morning when I returned from my shift, something waited for me inside the shack, lined up neatly beside the logbooks. 5 human fingers, freshly severed. Still wearing cheap tourist rings sold near the boardwalk. I screamed for Mike. The police returned, this time with detectives, collecting evidence and questioning me about enemies I didn't have. I told them about the creature in the footage, but their expressions tightened. Even Mike looked at me differently. Fearful, confused. The company shut down for 3 days as the investigation dragged on. During that time, 3 more tourists went missing. The news blamed the ocean. I knew better. When the yard reopened, I begged Mike to switch me to daytime runs only. For a while, everything seemed fine. I almost convinced myself the nightmare was over until I found the nest. I was refilling coolant in the maintenance bay when I noticed several ceiling panels in the far corner were misaligned. Curious, I grabbed a ladder and pushed one open. The crawl space above the bay was small, dusty, rarely used. But what I saw nearly knocked me off the rungs. It was a shrine of missing lives, wallets, phones, keychains, rings. Dozens of personal items arranged with disturbing precision across the beams. But the photos were worse. Hundreds of them. Vacation shots of tourists smiling along the Oregon coast, every face familiar from recent missing person reports. And in the center was a separate section dedicated entirely to me. Pictures taken from a distance on the highway. Shots of me fueling up, walking across truck stops, climbing into my cab. Weeks of surveillance. I was in nearly 100 photos, and that sweet, rotting smell hung thick in the air. Before I could climb down, the lights went out. The bay went dark. The radios died. Even my phone shut off. The rest of the town glowed outside. It was only the yard, only the maintenance bay that went dead. Then the voices started. Amy. Jack Patterson's voice drifting from somewhere above me. Amy, honey, could you help me? Then another voice. Tom Bradley, another trucker. Amy, I'm hurt. I need help. But Tom was supposed to be in Coos Bay, and Jack had left hours earlier. More voices joined in. Voices I recognized from people who had gone missing. They echoed from vents, from walls, from the crawl space above me. Perfect imitations. Impossible to tell if they were coming from one creature or many. Then my mother's voice floated down through the darkness. Amy, sweetheart, come downstairs. My mother lived in Portland. Hours away. This thing had never met her. But it could mimic any voice it heard or any voice of the people it had taken. Something began moving above me, heavy, deliberate steps shaking the beams. Dust rained down. Wood creaked. I grabbed the longest tire iron on the rack as the creature crawled through the ceiling space, tracking me by sound. Then it spoke in my own voice. Amy, don't be scared. I pointed the emergency fire hose toward the opening above me. It still had pressure. Still had heat. More panels crashed down as the creature lowered itself into the room. Up close, its body was a monstrous blend of spider and human form, limbs bending in ways no bone ever should. Black, slick flesh dripped with seawater and something darker. Its face was long, too many eyes watching me at once. Amy, it said in my voice. I've collected so many friends for you. They're waiting in the caves. It lunged. I blasted it with scalding water from the hose. The creature shrieked, a metallic tearing sound, and its skin blistered where the steam hit. While it writhed, I sprinted for the yard gate, unlocked it manually, and fled to my truck. It burst through the bay seconds later, racing after me with terrifying speed, flowing over obstacles with its many limbs. I barely escaped, driving straight to the police station. When I returned with Officer Davis, the creature was gone. My name is Frank Morrison, and for years I've been running from everything that ever mattered. Long-haul trucking was never supposed to be permanent. Nothing in my life was supposed to be permanent. I grew up in Portland watching my father drink himself into the grave after the lumber mill shut down. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep us warm in the winters. I swore I'd never become them, trapped, exhausted, drifting through life until the world finally crushed me. But somehow, there I was at 26, hauling produce up and down Oregon highways, sleeping in my cab behind abandoned gas stations, stealing $20 bills whenever a delivery left me in an unlocked back room. Anything to pretend I still had control over something. Truckers knew me everywhere as old Pete Morrison's boy, even though I told them 100 times I wasn't related. Pete ran the tiny dispatch office in Fossil and gave me a job when I drifted there 5 years ago with nothing but a backpack and a story about wanting a fresh start. In reality, I'd been evicted, dumped, and too ashamed to tell anyone. Fossil was supposed to be temporary. A place to stack money, figure out my next move. Instead, it became a cage I locked myself inside. And what happened starting on November 12, 2019, made me realize some cages are exactly where you're meant to rot. Pete's dispatch sat beside the old highway like a tombstone marking the grave of small-town American hope. Built in 1954, the place had that fake nostalgia tourists adored, wood paneling that creaked like warnings, narrow hallways where you brushed against strangers, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like a dying heartbeat. The building used to be a pharmacy back when Fossil had enough life to support one. Dr. Abraham Wexler ran it for decades before he closed early one winter night and drove his Buick straight off the bridge into the John Day River. They never recovered his body, only pill bottles scattered along the rocks like breadcrumbs left by someone who regretted their choice too late. Pete bought the place cheap in '89, converted it into a dispatch office, and kept Wexler's old pharmacy counter in the back, draping a tarp over it to store spare radios. Late nights when I slept in my truck outside, I'd swear I heard pill bottles rattling behind that tarp. Pete always said the building settled funny. My truck was a stubborn Kenworth built in 1993, the same year Pete installed the ancient dispatch system he worshipped like scripture. He called it classic, reliable, trustworthy, even though the GPS glitched constantly and the two-way radio hissed with static whenever the temperature dropped. The onboard printer jammed if I breathed near it, and the engine only turned over if I tapped the dashboard in exactly the right rhythm. Every morning at 6 a.m., I climbed into the cab and listened to the semi-groan awake. The dashboard lights flickered on one by one, casting their sick yellow glow across cracked vinyl seats. The radio clicked, sputtered, then leaked static that almost whispered. November 12th began exactly like that. Overcast sky the color of dishwater. A wind cutting across the empty lots like something searching for weak spots in the world. Pete had driven to Bend for his monthly doctor's appointment, leaving me alone to handle morning runs. My first pickup was always the same. Highway 19 rest stop, 6 a.m., sharp, where old Mrs. Jarp, where old Mrs. Cast. Helen Crawford waited by the vending machines every Tuesday. 92 years old, coffee in one hand, frosted donut in the other, Marlboro Lights tucked into her coat pocket. She'd been there at the exact same time every Tuesday for as long as I'd been driving routes for Pete. "Morning, Helen," I said as I lowered the passenger step for her. She smiled with those watery blue eyes. "Such a nice boy. Your mother must be proud." I never bothered correcting her anymore. Small towns believe whatever comforts them. At 6:30, I swung through Bradley's auto yard. Tom Bradley always waited beside a mound of scrap, buying his weekly ride, just a quick lift down the road. Same exact route. Same exact time. His hands were always stained with something dark oil or dirt or something worse. At 7:10, I stopped at the Kellerman Ranch. Sarah came out with her weekly supply run in 2 reusable bags, milk, bread, ground beef, peas, and a bottle of wine she tried to hide like I hadn't seen it every week. The same people. The same times. The same loop. I watched Fossil repeat itself endlessly, and somehow I still convinced myself I wasn't like them. I was temporary. I had plans. I was going somewhere. Then at 7:30, someone new flagged me down. She looked maybe 30, standing alone on the roadside in a gray wool coat that was expensive once, but styled like something from a 1930s film. Her hair was set in perfect finger waves, lipstick dark as dried blood. She moved like she'd been waiting specifically for my truck, walking directly to the cab steps. "Heading north?" she asked, though it didn't sound like a question. I nodded and she climbed in, placing a canvas bag on her lap. She didn't look at me, didn't blink, just stared at the humming radio with eyes like black water. When she stepped out 20 minutes later at an empty pull-off, she left behind a receipt from my cab printer, though I hadn't printed anything. The paper listed items I hadn't delivered to her: bleach, canned corn, frozen peas. The first letter spelled BCCCP. I crumpled it. Probably a glitch. 10 minutes later, another stranger waved me down. A man in his 40s wearing overalls caked in Oregon red mud. He asked for a ride to the next rest stop. Paid me exact change. Coins so cold, they felt like ice cubes in my palm. He sat silently, watching the dashboard as if reading invisible words across it. By noon, I picked up 6 strangers along Highway 19. Each ride left behind another phantom printout on my cab's glitchy printer. When I arranged the first letters of each item listed, they spelled HELP trapped. My hands shook on the wheel. My sandwich slid off the console. 6 unrelated hitchhikers couldn't coordinate a message, not unless they weren't unrelated at all. When I reached the fossil station, I grabbed the rider log, a dusty binder where Pete kept track of every pickup and drop-off for legal reasons. I flipped through the past 20 years. There was Helen every Tuesday at 6 a.m., Tom at 6:30, Sarah at 7:10. The same 3 people logged at the same times for decades. But none of the strangers were there, not in any year. Not once. More appeared throughout the afternoon. More old-fashioned clothing, more exact change, more freezing coins. And each abandoned paper in my cab spelled a second message when read in sequence: YOU are already dead. That evening I called Pete. Do you know a woman, maybe 30 finger-wave hair? I picked her up this morning. Bag full of bleach and canned goods? Silence. Frank, he said slowly. What woman? I checked the route footage. You carried 3 passengers today. Helen, Tom, Sarah. That's it. What about the man with the mud-stained overalls, or the woman with the yarn bag? Frank, you might need a day off. When he hung up, I unlocked the office and watched the route footage myself. The dash cam replayed every mile. I watched the entire morning unfold. I watched myself talking, nodding, handing out change, printing receipts, opening the passenger door. But I was alone. Picking up no one, talking to empty air, taking money from no one, driving ghosts. Panic clawed up my throat. That night, sitting in my cab, I dug into Fossil's history through old county records. What I found froze me more than any Oregon winter could. In 1993, the same year my truck and dispatch system were installed, a gas leak had formed beneath Main Street. Carbon monoxide seeped through the cracks for days. By the time anyone realized, 47 people were dead shop owners, customers, clerks, and passers-by trapped in their cars at the intersection, including Dr. Wexler, found slumped over his pharmacy counter, including Helen with her morning coffee, including Tom buying cigarettes, including Sarah loading her groceries with her children. They all died in the exact places I had seen them every Tuesday. The leak was traced to faulty work done during Pete's renovation. The county sued him. He went bankrupt. Records said he died of a heart attack in 2004. Pete's dispatch was condemned in 2006. The building had been empty ever since. I had been picking up dead passengers on dead roads to a dead office run by a dead man. But I wasn't dead. At least, I didn't think I was. There was no Frank Morrison in the 1993 victims, no record tying me to Fossil. Unless I drove home, tearing through my documents, birth certificate, license, social security card, all normal. But when I searched county death records, my blood iced over. Frank Morrison, born March 3rd, 1993. Died March 3rd, 2019. Apparent suicide. Carbon monoxide poisoning in a closed garage. Found weeks later by a landlord. It happened on my birthday. The same night my girlfriend left me. The night I was evicted. The night I sat in my running car and let everything go dim. I had died. And somehow ended up here. A purgatory highway loop where the dead repeated their final routines. But unlike them, I remembered my death. I remembered choosing it. And that made me something different. The next Tuesday, the dead finally acknowledged me. Helen climbed into my cab, her usual coffee steaming in her hands. "How does it feel to know now, Frank?" Her voice slithered like it had crawled up from the riverbed. Tom appeared behind her without any sound of a door opening. "We've been waiting for someone like us. Someone who chose it." Sarah's children peered through my window, their eyes black voids. "We died on purpose, Frank. Just like you." The truck cabin shifted around me. Gauges flickered, rearranging themselves into strange patterns. The radio static hummed lullabies in languages older than highways. "You belong here," they whispered. "You chose this." And I finally understood. The gas leak hadn't been an accident. Wechsler opened the pipes, exhausted by failing to cure anyone. Helen stayed because going home meant facing another lonely day. Tom lit his cigarette knowing the fumes might ignite. Sarah loaded her kids into the car because she couldn't bear leaving them. They'd all chosen death in quiet ways, just like me. My name is Amy Chen, and for a few months and a handful of long, sleepless days, I worked as a barista at Bruin View Cafe in Bandon, Oregon. But before all that, I was a long-haul trucker running beans, dairy, and produce up and down the Oregon coast to the tiny towns that cling to Highway 101 like they're afraid the ocean will swallow them whole. I took the cafe job only because I needed college money and thought getting off the road would help me feel human again. It doesn't sound like much, but when you've spent years driving through ghost towns and abandoned rest stops in the dead of night, any place with warm lights and regular customers feels like a lifeline. I loved that cafe more than I expected. The smell of fresh coffee at sunrise, the way locals brightened when I remembered their orders, even how Mr. William Brennan tested new blends and asked for my opinion like it actually mattered. What I didn't know was that he had spent years as a lab assistant at the Rajneesh PUM compound before it collapsed. What I didn't know was that he brought something with him, something alive. What I didn't know was that the special fertilizer he used for his private coffee gardens contained cremated remains of cult members who died during biological experiments that never made it into any official FBI record. I didn't know any of this until it was too late. It began on July 4th, the day everything went wrong. I rolled into the cafe's gravel lot at 5 a.m., my old Peterbilt still cooling behind me from an overnight haul down from Coos Bay. The place sits right off Highway 101, just south of Bandon's tourist strip. A renovated Victorian house with exposed beams and ocean-facing windows that glow gold in the mornings. Brennan had remodeled it himself, including the basement storage room where we kept our beans. Every variety labeled, organized, documented like museum specimens. But the second I walked inside, I knew something was wrong. The air wasn't cold and crisp like it usually was before the machines heated up. It was thick, humid, heavy, like breathing through a wet towel. And beneath the familiar scent of roasted beans was something darker. Earthy, metallic. A smell I knew too well from old truck stops in the backwoods, like soil soaked in something that shouldn't be there. I headed to the storage room to prep the first batch. That's when I saw them. Every coffee bean in every container had sprouted. Not tiny green shoots like you'd expect, but thick, fleshy vines twisting from floor to ceiling. They crawled into the walls, wound around shelves, and pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like they were breathing. The trunks were as wide as my thumbs, glowing with dark red fluid that moved like blood pumping through arteries. A wet sucking sound filled the room, syncing perfectly with the rise and fall of the vines, as if the whole basement had a heartbeat. My chest tightened, my pulse raced. When I stepped closer, the fluid pumping inside those stems shimmered under the overhead lights, thick and dark like congealed blood. I grabbed my phone to call Brennan. Before I could even unlock it, the screen glitched, flickered, and replaced my home screen with a message I had never seen before. Cultivation phase complete. Subject integration beginning. Do not disturb. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. But the fear wasn't the worst part. A tingling sensation spread through my fingertips, and when I looked down, the skin under my nails had turned faint green. My nails themselves looked longer. Thicker, sharper, sharper. I'd been in that room for maybe 3 minutes. I tried to leave. God knows I tried. I reached for the door, but my fingers wouldn't close around the handle. My arm felt like it was moving underwater, and instead of stepping out, my body turned back toward the vines, as if strings pulled me from inside my spine. A sweet, intoxicating scent filled the air. My vision sharpened instantly. Colors brightened until they were almost painful. The red bricks looked like they were glowing, the brown beans on the floor glistened like obsidian. I could hear everything. The refrigerator humming upstairs, the drip of condensation on pipes, even the faint rush of blood in my own veins. And underneath all of it, whispers. Soft, familiar whispers. Not coming from the room. Growing inside my skull. Stay. You belong here. Serve the customers. Share the gift. I slapped my hands over my ears, but the whispers only grew louder. When I glanced at my reflection in the espresso machine's chrome surface, my pupils had shrunk to tiny points, and faint crack-like lines crawled beneath the skin of my forehead. But it was 5:30 a.m., and truckers were already starting to pull into the lot for their morning caffeine before hitting the road again. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The vines behind me swayed as if watching. I dug through the freezer and found one last bag of uncontaminated beans. The rest of the cafe felt normal. The machines warm, the windows glowing with sunrise. Maybe if I focused, I could pretend I hadn't seen anything. But every time I moved, the vines shifted behind the walls. Listening. Waiting. My first customer was Mrs. Patterson, who used to bring fresh-caught rockfish to the truckers parked outside. She ordered her usual double-shot cortado. I brewed it from the clean beans. But when I poured the drink, a thin, oily film surfaced, swirling on top like it was alive. And that scent, the same earthy sweetness from the basement, filled the air. "Amy, sweetheart, did you change the blend today?" she asked. I stared at her cup. My mouth opened, and a voice I didn't recognize, my own, answered for me. "Just trying something new." She smiled warmly, lifted the cup, and took one sip. Her pupils blew wide, engulfing her irises in endless black. A dazed smile spread across her face, soft and dreamy, wrong in every possible way. "Oh my," she whispered. "I can taste the forest. I can hear the trees singing." She wandered to a table, sat down, and stared out the window with a blissful emptiness that made my stomach twist. Within minutes, her skin took on a faint gray-green cast. More customers poured in, truckers, fishermen, tourists, retirees, all ordering their usuals. Every cup developed that swirling film. Every drink released the same scent. And every time I tried to warn someone, my throat locked. Every time I reached for clean beans, my hand diverted toward the contaminated ones. Within an hour, every person in the cafe had blackened eyes, gray-tinged skin, and the same slow, rhythmic breathing as the vines downstairs. And then, they began to change. Mrs. Patterson's fingers thinned into root-like tendrils that burrowed through the wooden table. Tom, the fisherman who always talked to truckers about tides, stretched unnaturally, his arms lengthening until his fingertips brushed the floor. Bark spread across his collarbones like lichen. Jenny, who worked at the visitor center and always brought donuts for drivers, turned bright green as clumps of hair drifted from her scalp. She lifted her arms toward the window, swaying like a plant reaching for sunlight. This wasn't contamination. It was cultivation. I tore into Brennan's office, desperate for answers. I flung open drawers, scattered folders, dug through papers until I found the truth. Medical records from the Rajneesh compound, charts documenting biological experiments, photos of half-human, half-plant test subjects, letters between Brennan and Ma Anand Sheila discussing agricultural applications for biological weapons, ashes cremated cult members used as fertilizer. And then I found Brennan's journal. Day 1. The feds came. Sheila fled. I stayed. The cultivation chambers contain enough remains to continue our work. Day 17. The breakthrough isn't poison. The breakthrough is making death serve life. Day 89. Settled in Banton. Perfect, isolated town. No one questions a cafe owner's fertilizer. Day 402. Amy Chen started today. Perfect subject. Her cells should be primed for integration. Day 2090. The coffee is only the delivery system. What people consume is the transformed consciousness of the dead. Tomorrow, July 4th, we begin the final phase. Amy will serve the last free cup of coffee this town ever drinks. I looked up. And Brennan stood in the doorway. Only he wasn't human anymore. His skin looked like ancient bark, cracked, ridged, oozing golden sap. Flowering buds blinked where his eyes once were. Vines replaced his hair, reaching toward me like curious fingertips. And when he spoke, the words came not just from his mouth, but from the walls, the floor, the pipes, the beans on the counter. "Amy," he said gently, "do you understand why we chose you?" My transformation surged, green veins spidering beneath my skin, nails sharpening, wrists hardening into bark. And yet my mind stayed painfully clear. "You killed people," I said, voice low and distorted. "We gave them purpose," he whispered. "We freed them from loneliness. Every person who drinks the blend joins the collective. Every harvest strengthens us." He gestured toward the customers. Their bodies had merged beneath the floorboards, roots intertwined, limbs fused, a single massive organism breathing in sync. And inside my skull I could feel them, warmth, bliss, contentment. A living network. A part of me wanted it. A terrifyingly large part. But I thought of truckers who trusted this place. Fishermen who fed the town. Jenny's parents. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter. Every traveler who would drink this and disappear into the vines. I grabbed a butane torch from the kitchen and ignited the vines. The scream that erupted wasn't human. It came from everywhere, from the walls, the floors, the pipes, the pavement outside. The customers lurched toward me as one. Brennan reached out, flowers blooming from his fingertips. But the fire spread too fast. As the vines burned, the green in my skin faded. My nails shrank. My breath steadied. By the time firefighters arrived, half the cafe had collapsed. The official report blamed a gas leak. The customers were hospitalized for allergic reactions. Most left town immediately. Mrs. Besttown immediately. Patterson joined a commune. Ton vanished into the woods. My name is Marcus Williams, and I've been driving trucks up and down the forgotten highways of Oregon for years. Before that, I spent years in the Army as a communication specialist. When I got out I wanted something quiet, something predictable. Something where the only thing I had to listen to at night was my own engine. So I bought an old Peterbilt, patched her up, got my CDL, and started running routes between tiny towns most people forget exist. Spray, Oregon was one of those places. A speck on the map, a gas stop with a diner, a post office, and a population so small you could count them on both hands. It was the kind of place where strangers stood out, and truckers like me became part of the scenery after enough years of rolling through. Spray was more than a stop for fuel. It was where I kept my storage shed, parked my rig on off days, and grabbed a few hours of sleep before hitting Highway 19 again. I knew everyone there, and they knew me. Farmers, teachers, the mayor, Sheriff Davidson, half of them had flagged me down at some point to haul hay bales or deliver equipment. In a town that tiny, you become part trucker, part therapist, part moving bulletin board for local gossip. You hear everything whether you want to or not. I kept a few pieces of my old Army gear in the sleeper cab. An emergency radio, an EMF detector, some signal monitoring devices I probably shouldn't have taken when I left the service. Old habits die slow. But what happened starting September Este made me realize those habits might have saved my life. Some secrets should have stayed buried. And some experiments never should have existed in the first place. Thursday morning. a.m. I rolled into Spray like always, parked near the diner, grabbed coffee, and planned out my haul schedule. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I checked my equipment, logged my fuel, cleaned the cab. The morning fog drifted low over the highway, and the town felt eerily still. But Spray always felt too quiet, so I didn't think much of it. My first stop was Mrs. Chen's place. She ran a small produce stand outside town and needed a shipment of crates moved to a storage shed before the afternoon market. I'd helped her for years. She walked slow these days, hair silver and thin, always talking about her grandson in Portland who never visited as much as she hoped. I loaded the crates like always. When we finished, she brushed a few loose strands of her hair from her jacket. The wind wasn't strong, but the hair didn't fall naturally. It didn't drift or scatter. It landed in a perfectly straight line at her feet, every strand parallel. Like someone had placed them one by one. I stared at the ground long enough for her to notice. "You okay, Marcus?" she asked, voice soft. I forced a smile. Yeah, just zoning out. But when I bent down to pick up a strand, it was warm. Hair isn't supposed to be warm. It's dead. It cools instantly. But this felt like it was alive. I shook it off. Blamed the morning chill for messing with me. Loaded the last crate, said goodbye, and climbed back into my rig. But something nagged at me. Every time I glanced at my floor mat, I saw those perfectly aligned strands. Next stop, the gas station. Jim Bradley, the guy who ran it, always had work for me. Old equipment needing transport, scrap metal to haul. Salt of the earth guy. Same jokes. Same conversation every time. He hopped into my passenger seat so he could direct me to a busted generator behind the station. "How's business, Marcus?" he asked as he climbed in. "Quiet," I said. A lie. My fingers shook slightly as I shifted gears. We got halfway down the road when my landline, the one wired directly into my dash, rang. That thing hasn't rung in years. Not once. I picked it up. "Yeah, this is Marcus." Silence. Then rapid typing like dozens of keyboards hammering at once. And a voice followed, cold and mechanical. "Sample acquired. Subject cataloged. Genetic markers viable for behavioral prediction modeling." Then the line went dead. Jim raised an eyebrow. "What the hell was that?" "Wrong number," I muttered. But when we got back to the station and I stepped out of the cab, I froze. His hair. Jim had short, scruffy brown hair. Some of it must have shed onto the floor while he was sitting there. But instead of lying scattered across the rubber mat, it had aligned itself. Straight lines. Angles, shapes, symbols. I kicked the stray hair out of my truck fast, sweeping it aside like dirt. 10 minutes later, I checked again. The hair had arranged itself again. Circles, coordinates, a date. October 8th, 3 weeks away. When I dumped it into the trash near the pumps, the strands rearranged themselves in seconds, spelling one clear word: danger. My stomach tightened. I checked the coordinates. They pointed to the Cascadia subduction zone miles off the coast, the earthquake rupture zone. I grabbed my radio and called Sheriff Davidson. "Bill, you need to see something. Now." He rolled up in minutes, stepping out of his cruiser, hat low, expression tight with confusion. I showed him the words the hair had formed. Then I showed him the other messages. Warnings, symbols, letters forming sentences that should have been impossible. SPR. THEYARECOMING HELPUS. He stared at the patterns, jaw tight. "Marcus," he said slowly, "you know how old this town is?" "I've been coming here years," I said. "Guessing it was built 70 years before that." "My grandfather told me stories," he murmured. "Said the government used this area in the Cold War. Population studies. Behavioral prediction experiments. Officially, they never happened." "What kind of experiments?" I asked. He hesitated. "People went missing." Before I could respond, my landline rang again. I put it on speaker. Multiple voices spoke in perfect sync-layered, distorted, mechanical. Marcus Williams, former Army communications specialist. Neural implant model, R, immune to standard control frequencies. Cooperation required. My chest tightened. They knew everything about me. The voices shifted. Sheriff William Davidson. No cybernetic implants detected. Susceptible to influence. Processing. Bill's eyes glazed over. His posture stiffened. His expression emptied. "Bill?" I stepped closer. He turned his head slowly, like a puppet moved by invisible strings. "Marcus Williams. Report to sub-level facility immediately. Resistance will be met with community-wide consequences." I bolted. I dove into my truck, fired the engine, and tore down the road. The tires screamed against the pavement as I headed for my storage shed on the outskirts of town. I grabbed my old Army gear. EMF detector, radios, my portable EMP unit. When I powered everything up, the EMF detector spiked instantly. Massive readings. Strong, steady, pulsing from beneath downtown Spray. Directly under the diner where I parked every morning. My radio crackled again. Subject en route to facility. Behavioral modification % effective. Expanding collection radius. Genetic samples from individuals acquired. Genetic samples. Hair. I looked toward town. People were walking toward the diner. Mrs. First-to-Biggest. Chen. Jim. The mayor. Kids. Families. Everyone who'd been near me lately. But they weren't walking normally. Their steps were synchronized. Their faces blank. Their eyes black. I didn't have long. I swung my truck around, took a side road, and parked behind Miller's Hardware, watching from a distance. Nearly everyone in town had formed a perfect circle outside the diner. Silent. Waiting. I looked at my radio, then at my old fire department emergency codes. I keyed the mic. This is Unit 7. Gas leak at Miller's Hardware. Evacuate Main Street immediately. Not a drill. Minutes later, fire trucks screamed down the road. The controlled townspeople turned their heads in unison and followed the sound, giving me a few precious seconds. I sprinted across the street and slipped through the diner's back entrance. More hair patterns covered the floor star, charts, sequences, glyphs. The boards vibrated under my boots, not from footsteps, but from machinery beneath. I pried up a floorboard. Instead of dirt, I found metal. A reinforced hatch stamped with warnings in English, Chinese, and Russian. Project Oracle, Level 5 clearance, required behavioral prediction and control. My pulse hammered as I short-circuited the lock. The hatch hissed open, releasing a gust of cold air. I climbed down a ladder into a cavernous chamber glowing with blue light. Rows of servers hummed. Screens flickered with footage from every home and road and sprayed decades of surveillance. Every resident. Every moment, hundreds of medical files. DNA charts. Behavioral logs. The main screen displayed, Project Oracle subjects cataloged, then another line appeared. Predicted catastrophic event, Cascadia subduction, Zone E. Earthquake October, magnitude. Estimated casualties, my breath caught. What are you? I whispered. The speakers crackled. My name is Dorothy Kim, and before anything else, you need to understand one impossible truth. I've been dead for years, but I only discovered it weeks ago. For what I believed was years, I've been driving long-haul routes up and down the Oregon coast, living inside the cab of my Peterbilt, stacking miles like they meant something. I thought trucking had given me a second life after decades of teaching, that the open road had replaced the classroom, that the highways could never surprise me again. But Wheeler, Oregon isn't on any GPS anymore. And the people living there, every smiling face at the diner, every trucker who waved at me from the other side of the road, have all been dead since October, years before I ever believed I rolled through the town. I didn't know that. I didn't know any of it, not until the day everything unraveled. Wheeler had always felt like a refuge, a quiet rest stop along my usual coastal route. A forgotten town with a single diesel pump, a tiny diner that served burnt coffee, and a small parking lot where I could sleep without being bothered. I knew every familiar face. Old Mr. Henderson always filled my thermos and tucked a tiny packet of sugar into my coat pocket just in case. Tommy Walsh helped me adjust my mirrors when I hauled heavy freight. The Garrett twins always swapped trucker stories with me like they'd lived 3 lifetimes on the road. These people were the heartbeat of Wheeler. They were my routine, my comfort. But I didn't know that every single one of them had died long before I ever believed I parked my rig beside them. I learned that truth in the most horrifying way, a way that still makes my hands tremble on the wheel. The discovery began with a single object, a small red logbook sitting on my dashboard one morning, as if someone had placed it there while I slept inside the truck. Not a trucking log, smaller, older, with a broken brass lock and water stains down its spine. I opened it, expecting to see route numbers or a forgotten inspection checklist. Instead, I found a date, October, and handwriting. My handwriting, my whoops, my tight lowercase e's, the way I filled the entire line before lifting my pen, every quirk I'd had since college, yet describing something I had no memory of living. A wall of water, screaming. A tsunami roaring over the highway. My truck spinning, flipping, crushing metal as the ocean swallowed Wheeler whole. A final entry written as the wave reached my windshield. I knew my own handwriting too well. But I also knew I had never written those words, And Wheeler had never been destroyed by a tsunami, or so I thought. The back of the logbook held newspaper clippings, ruined, soft with age, glued onto the pages. Headlines declaring a massive tsunami had obliterated Wheeler. No survivors. Lists of names. Every face I thought I'd spoken to for years. And among them, my own name. Dorothy Kim. Long-haul driver. Yet in my memory, on that date, I was hauling lumber near Eugene, safe and alive. Except when I tried to recall anything about my husband James, our anniversary, where he was buried, whether he ever rode in my truck, my mind turned blank. Silent. Like my entire life had been printed on thin paper, and someone had started erasing it line by line. The worst part came next. My truck's black box logs, the ones that track everything, mileage, stops, break times, all showed that I had been pulling into Wheeler every single day for weeks, always at exactly the same time. The exact minute the tsunami had supposedly struck. My GPS routes looked like a stuck record stop, refuel, sleep, repeat, looping through a town that didn't exist. I had no memory of any of it. That was when the panic settled into my bones. Cold and heavy and undeniable. The next time I rolled into Wheeler, everything felt wrong. Mr. Henderson came to my truck first, waving like he always did, but his fingers were blue. Not cold frozen. His breath misted in the warm summer air. His shirt was still soaked, clinging to him the way clothing sticks to a drowned body pulled fresh from icy water. He handed me a thermos of coffee, the same way he'd done for years, except the thermos dripped seawater. Salt water. When I looked toward the diner, I saw him inside too, sitting at his favorite booth, reading the morning paper. Two of him. Both wrong. I blinked hard, and the coffee cup vanished from my hand. I stepped back into my cab, heart pounding, and watched the GPS flicker. 2. Established 890. Population. And then nothing. No number. A blank space like the town didn't know how many people lived there anymore. Tommy walked by my truck next, tipping his cap the way he always did. But when I asked him what year it was, he answered without thinking, giving the exact year he died. He didn't even seem confused. The Garrett twins were the same. They believed it was the year they froze to death in a freak winter storm. Every person I spoke to believed they were living their final day, suspended in the exact moment they died. When I asked how they got here, each of them described the same thing. After drowning or freezing or being crushed by the wave, they woke up standing in Wheeler, as if the road itself had pulled them in. By noon, the truth forced itself into view. A man I didn't recognize walked across the lot toward me, wearing a dripping suit that smelled of salt and rot. He introduced himself, Harold Davies, former mayor of Wheeler. He handed me 3 ruined books. My books, from the truck's tiny shelf behind the passenger seat. Books that had been dry an hour before now collapsed like wet paper, dripping onto the pavement. He told me Wheeler existed in a pocket outside time, created by my death on the highway as I tried to outrun the tsunami. My truck had been hit dead on. The wave crushed me inside the cab, breaking bones, flooding the engine, pinning me beneath glass and steel as the ocean swallowed the town. My fear, my shock, my refusal to accept that I had died had built this place. The town, this ghost version of it, was being held together by my remaining life force. Every day that I kept driving through Wheeler, confused and lost, I fed them. I wasn't a visitor, he said. I was the anchor. And I had been draining myself for years to keep them from fading. When he told me I was running out of self, something inside me shattered. I looked at my reflection in the truck mirror and saw the truth I had ignored. My skin was turning translucent. My hands flickered when I moved them too fast. Tattoos I'd had for decades looked like faint watercolor stains. My memories dissolved every time I tried to hold on to them. Without me, Wheeler would collapse. But if I let them keep taking pieces of me, Wheeler would remain forever, while I would become nothing at all. Not even a ghost behind the wheel. That afternoon, I watched the town with new eyes. The diner's menu had no words. The gas pump gauge didn't move. The Garrett twins weren't talking. They were repeating the same lines over and over, like actors stuck in their final rehearsal. The entire town was mimicking life, clinging to the idea of who they used to be. They weren't alive. They weren't dead. They were draining me to stay here. And they were waiting for my decision. At exactly the time the tsunami struck all those years ago, the diner lights flickered off. Every person in Wheeler stopped moving and turned toward my truck. Silent. Desperate. Waiting for permission to continue existing. Harold stepped closer, water pooling around his shoes, and told me I had only two choices: drive away and let Wheeler fade, letting every trapped soul finally rest, or stay and let them consume whatever little remained of me so they could continue their endless loop. It was impossible to look at them. These people I'd spoken to for what felt like years, people who had become my routine, my comfort, and accept that none of it had ever been real. I climbed back into my truck, hands shaking, and opened the onboard system. The logs. The fuel records. The ghostly route history anchoring Wheeler to me. My truck idled softly, waiting for a command. My thumb hovered over the reset function, the option every driver avoids unless absolutely necessary. It wipes everything, every record, every route, every trace of where you've been. I pressed it. As each log vanished, so did the people. Mr. Henderson faded while giving me the same gentle smile he always had. Tommy tipped his cap, the brim dissolving into mist. The twins vanished mid-laugh, relief replacing fear for the first time since their deaths. One by one, Wheeler's residents disappeared like ghosts stepping back into the ocean. The diner flickered out next. Then the gas pump. Then the road itself. Buildings turned translucent, peeling away like wet wallpaper. My truck shook as if caught in a storm, but the sky above was perfectly clear. Harold Davies was the last to go. He thanked me softly, voice bubbling like someone speaking underwater, telling me they were never meant to linger this long, that they had been waiting for someone to let them go. As he vanished, I felt myself fading too, not in fear, but with a strange, peaceful warmth. The last sound I heard was the ocean receding and the faraway hum of a highway without ghosts. A week later, a trucker hiking off-route near Nehalem reported finding the rusted frame of a semi-cab half buried in the mud. His GPS insisted he was parked in downtown Wheeler, though no such town exists on any map. Inside the cab, he found a small red logbook on the cracked dashboard.